Okay, give me a moment to troubleshoot this. We have a server error.
Which error was it?
A 500 error.
500, yeah,
It is very, yeah.
So 500 server error.
it's a generic, the specific resource can be reached on the server.
Okay.
You're getting that when you manually authenticated and go live,
So it
should
says
work.
prepare to live stream and it says 500 internal server error. Let me try.
Let me check if Zoom is having
Did I-
some issues.
Had a movie set?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Just checking.
And I'm going to Queens after this,
You go to Queens?
after this.
Okay,
I don't live there, I'm just.
I know.
Yeah.
just to take a ride, not so.
It's
It's not that far, one stop.
I'm sorry, it's another day.
It's from on the other side of the bridge, or the tunnel.
Very
far psychologically. I'm actually going to Brooklyn via Queens.
Don't stop.
It's agreed.
Are we being recorded?
No, they're still,
Yeah, we're recording, we're just not live on YouTube.
Yeah, we're,
So you can also enter it manually. You can do the customer that was there.
yeah, it's.
Sign language is.
Well,
I just got
Well,
this for my.
let's not delay the start of the meeting too much. We'll also be in communication with Jesus as to whether he has any ideas of how to, troubleshoot.
Okay, so you wanna crop this and upload later?
That might be what we need to do in the end. So, yeah, just get started.
Alright, perfect. Alright, welcome everybody to the March 25th, 2024 joint meeting of the Land Use and Waterfront Committee and the Housing and Homelessness Committee. My name is Majid Abdul Samad and I am the chair of the Land Use and Waterfront Committee. Tonight, we're joined by Housing and Homelessness Committee Chair Rich Mintz, Assistant District Manager Brendan Berth, and Community Coordinator Brian Lafferty. This meeting is called to order at 6:35 p.m. As a reminder, New York State law requires all committee board members who are not able to attend the meeting in person to have their cameras and first and last name displayed from the time the meeting is called to order until the meeting is adjourned. Members of the public who are attending virtually, you can raise any questions using Q&A feature of Zoom. Members of the public here in person, please raise your hand. We'll identify you to speak. We need a volunteer. Actually, Rich will volunteer to take meeting minutes.
yes,
Thank
I'll
you so
take
much.
minutes from the video.
Much appreciated. All right, taken attendance by roll call. Brendan will conduct it.
Okay. Committee members, I will call your name. When your name is called, please say present. I will announce if there is quorum. First for land use, Majid Abdul Samad,
Present.
Victoria Benicar,
Present.
Jen Collins,
Yep.
Rich Mintz,
Present.
Larry Shire,
Present.
Sandra Sherrod,
Present.
Letty Simon. I do not see Letty. Susan Steinberg,
Present.
Mark Thompson,
Present.
Gabe Terzo.
Present.
Land use has a forum. And now for housing and homelessness. Kyle Levi,
Present.
Eric Goldberg. Nat Kalani,
Present.
Abigail Cruzmart. Is not here. Sandra Leftoff,
Here.
Rich Mintz,
Present.
Miriam Rowe,
Present.
Lydia Shrednick,
Present.
and Matthew Weintraub is not here. But we have a quorum for both committees.
Great, thank you. So the agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office and is reflected on the screen before you. If there are no objections, we adopted as shared. If anybody objects to the agenda, please raise your hand. Seeing none in person or online, the agenda is adopted.
The minutes from the February 22nd Housing and Homelessness Committee meeting were distributed ahead of time by the board office. If there is no objection, we'll adopt the minutes as drafted. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting the minutes, please raise your hand. Seeing no objections, the minutes are adopted. They will soon be available on the CB6 website.
I should have thought this through before I ate the cookie. Sorry. The minutes from the February 26th Land Use and Waterfront Committee meeting also are still being drafted. Once they're ready, we will let you all know.
In order to conduct an efficient meeting, let's observe a few ground rules. No one may speak until granted the floor. Committee members who are here in person, if you have a question about committee business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand and we will identify you so you can speak. Committee members who are on Zoom, if you have a question about committee business, you may raise your hand through Zoom and we will identify you so you can speak. It's extremely important that only one person speak at a time so that people watching at home can understand what is being said by each committee member. The chat function for committee members on Zoom should not be used for committee business or questions about agenda topics. You should make such remarks on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. Please only use chat to alert us to technical difficulties or to state information in writing that was already stated aloud on the record. I think I'll cede to you since this is a land use meeting for the agenda items.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so we're gonna jump right into the first item on the agenda, which is discussion of the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity Zoning Text Amendment. Just as a reminder, the city is proposing 3 types of zoning text amendments. We already discussed zoning for economic opportunity. We already discussed for carbon neutrality, that's focused more on environmental issues. And today we're talking about housing. And we are joined by George James again. Hi, George. Thank you for taking time to join us. Explain to us what this is.
I'm happy to be here. I will share my screen.
Great.
Okay. So as Majed was just saying, we have the 3 amendments, and we're going to talk about housing opportunity today, but I will say that zoning for carbon neutrality was amended by City Council and was passed in December, and it's now law. Zoning for economic opportunity was modified by the CPC, was sent to City Council. Their hearing is set for April 8th. It was just officially announced today that the hearing at City Council will be April 8th in case you have issues you'd like to bring to their attention. And then zoning opportunity, zoning for housing opportunity is tentatively set to be referred out in a month or so. And this is essentially an early peek at that. We don't have zoning text, but we do have the draft scope of work. And the draft scope of work for the DEIS, which we didn't have for the other 2, because they did not require a DEIS, but this one does. And the draft scope of work have detailed descriptions of the zoning changes that will be made. Now, it's not as detailed as zoning text, but it's, it gets into some detail. There's also the environmental assessment. And then I have links to all of this stuff in case you really want to get into it. There have been they've been 2 information sessions which have been recorded. One that focuses on universal affordability preference and the other one about diverse housing types. And there'll be 2 more, the next one in 2 days, the missing middle housing. And these are all done by DCP. All right, getting into it. So the scope of work of the EIS gives these detailed descriptions, right? And what we find is that a lot of it, I would say well more than half, affect the R1 through R5 districts, which means it doesn't affect you at all, like 0 impact. So most of this is not going to have any impact on Community District 6. I'm not going to talk about any of these other outer borough changes today, but I will say that they're significant, and I will also say that they're likely overdue. We've had a lot of zoning changes over the past 25 years, and with the exception of a few downzonings, it's largely spared the outer boroughs, or especially in eastern Queens and some other places. And so there are some significant changes that they're bringing into these other districts. They're big for the outer boroughs, but they would be insignificant for Manhattan. So, but that's not to say everything isn't relevant. There are actually some major changes that will impact Community District 6, and we're going to review these 7. So the University Affordability Preference, which is essentially more FAR for affordable housing. Then there's zoning relief to make buildings with smaller units. Changes to make infill on height factor housing estates easier and bigger. There's the exemption for quality housing from the sliver rule. Number 5 is expanding the dates for non-residential building conversions to allow for more non-residential building conversions. Oops, sorry. Number 6 is floating the floor area from landmarks, which is something that I was not expecting, but found in there. And number 7 is changes to the tower on base regulations, which was also a surprise to me. Okay, so number 1, and this is really, I think, the heart of it, is what they're calling the universal affordability preference, or more floor area ratio for affordable housing. It builds off of AIRS, and a lot of you probably don't know what AIRS is: Affordable Independent Residences for Seniors. It's an existing housing bonus. We have it right now, and it gives additional floor area to projects with affordable units for seniors. It was adopted in its current form in 2016. It modified something that was in zoning for decades, but it essentially expanded it, made it a little bit more bulletproof in 2016. But it actually hasn't been all that popular. And in fact, it was suspended for much of its existence due to fair housing concerns. They've started redoing AIRS buildings, I think in 2022, but from 2019 to 2022, there was this, a suspension in these. Basically, to qualify for the bonus, developments have to have at least 10 units of affordable housing for seniors, averaging 80% of AMI. And the way it's designed now, AIRS bonuses vary according to zoning district. Some have AIRS bonuses, others don't. The UAP, the change that's promoted in housing opportunity, will expand these bonuses to all high-density districts and apply them to all affordable housing developments. The idea is that it's no longer only for affordable seniors. It would be for all affordable housing developments would be able to get this bonus. The FAR and height bonuses for universal affordability preference are substantial, but they're in line with AIRS. And so what I've done is I've taken zoning districts that exist in your community district. This is the basic FAR. This is the AIRS FAR. This is the universal affordability preference FAR. And you'll see they're mostly the same, except in the places that didn't allow FAR or AIRS FAR bonuses, which is the R8B and the R9A and the R9. Now all districts will have a universal affordability preference. So if you put affordable housing in your buildings, you will get usually it's a 20% FAR bonus. And likewise, there's an increase in height that goes along with the increase in FAR, so that FAR can be accommodated within the building envelope.
Just a quick question.
Yep.
Sorry, George.
Yeah, it's fine.
How much affordability needs to be in the building to be universal?
So the idea is that you get a 20% FAR bonus. That 20% FAR bonus will be used for affordability.
Okay.
So it's a 1-to-1. That's the way I understand it right now.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Can you explain what the FAR is exactly?
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. FAR it stands for floor area ratio. It is the ratio of the building size to the lot area. So what that means is that if you have a 10,000 square foot lot and your FAR is 5, you could build a 50,000 square foot building. That means 5 times the size of the lot, which is 10,000. So that would result in 50,000 square feet. It's how we basically in New York City, how we regulate density. And so, you know, in Midtown, we have FARs of 15 up to 18 with, and sometimes higher with bonuses. And in other places, you know, like the mid blocks, we normally have much lower densities. I apologize for not going through that. I know the land use committee, most of the folks knew that already, and I didn't have my explaining FAR slide.
I have one more question. Does that mean you can build them bigger and taller?
Yes. So if
can-
you have affordability in the building, you could build bigger and taller. So like, for instance, let's look at the R8B here, right? So right now you could do a 4 FAR building and you could go up to 75 feet. Under the universal affordability preference, you could go to 4.8 FAR and up to 105 feet. So it's a 30-foot increase in height and a 20% increase in floor area.
Actually, can we take a question from Susan as well?
Of course,
If it's-
of course.
Okay, thank you. 10 units seems kind of skimpy to me. How did they come up with the 10 units? For
Oh,
the,
you know, that 10 units, it's from the 2016 airs. You know, but it's something that I think they'll carry forward. And that's at least 10 units, right? So if you have more than 10 units, it is expected that most of the developments will have more than 10 units. If you have fewer than 10 units, it's sometimes the administrative burden to going to HPD and getting, you know, your affordable housing plan approved and going through all the regulatory agreements is kind of heavy, so that they give you some relief if you have not very many units in the building.
thank you.
That's the logic anyway. Okay, continuing on. So another part of the universal affordability preference is replacing the optional R10 program with universal affordability preference. So currently, the way it works is that R10 equivalent districts, which are basically the areas outside of Midtown, because Midtown has special rules, but let's say 3rd Avenue, much of 2nd Avenue, 23rd Street. Right now, you can get a 20% FAR bonus for affordable units, but the amount of affordability required is like 5%, and it can be placed off-site. That is the crappy optional R10 inclusionary housing bonus, which was developed, you know, many, many years ago and was not fixed when we did mandatory inclusionary housing in 2016. And, you know, what they're trying to do is they're trying to fix it, which I give great credit to, because this has always been one of the biggest giveaways, because it's just not proportional. The FAR bonus you get is not proportional to the amount of affordable housing you have to give. And so they will be essentially getting rid of the program as it is currently designed and replacing it with universal affordability preference, which would not increase the bonus, but it will increase the amount of affordable housing that you have to give for the bonus.
George, can we get just a couple of clarifying points?
Yes, of course.
So there's an existing bonus for corner lots in dense districts that are built up to the property line, where they get additional units if they additional height if they include affordable housing. Is that being superseded or replaced by this, or is that a totally separate thing?
Well, I
It's
mean,
called-
universal affordability preference is touching all of the existing affordable housing, zoning affordable housing programs, right?
Yeah.
It's replacing the optional R10, it's replacing inclusionary housing. It builds on mandatory inclusionary housing. It's essentially going to replace everything. I don't know that like how it's specifically going to change what you're talking about. But it
It's
is
called
going to
something
change.
like the quality construction provision or something.
Or quality
Um,
housing, all right.
I know it because I live on a corner where 4 of them
Okay.
have done them, so,
Okay.
all right. Okay.
So it's gonna affect them all. I mean, it's, but it
The net
builds upon,
though, the net is that those buildings will be able to be built taller and bulkier even than they can now under their current bonus,
in most cases, that's absolutely true,
Okay.
yes.
which I think is good, to be clear. Okay.
Larry? Sorry, just one question from Larry.
Okay, this is to clarify something or confirm something that you were saying earlier
Yeah.
regarding the R10 and shifting the housing into another area. Is that being eliminated by this?
You know, that's a very good question. I read like, what is it doing with offsite? And I could not find that in the scope of work. So right now, the way it works is most people who take the R10 bonus, they do their affordable housing offsite. They essentially get a certificate from HPD that says that you're supporting these housing units in this development. And I don't know what it was vague on what the offsite program would be. And I'm not exactly 100% sure how it's going to change, but it seems like they are analyzing everything with it being on site, but there may be offsite provisions that they didn't have to detail in the scope of work.
Majed, may I make a suggestion that we put a pin in it to try to pin this down?
Yep, already making notes of it. Go ahead, Jim.
I'm just curious from the housing committee, does anybody know what the mean income for our community district is? The mean income?
I mean, the mean is gonna be higher than the median, right?
Not necessarily.
But if we're a high income district, I'm doing math in my head very fast.
Well, the median
I guess
is
it depends on how many people we have,
how many people
yeah.
when you take the center number.
but
The
I,
mean is the average.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I don't know what that average is.
We have access to that, I just don't know it offhand.
And actually, George, can you just clarify what AMI is, since we're talking about 80%, right?
Just, I checked Fannie Mae today, the median is 119,000.
Okay, I actually think the city might publish that, I'm gonna look for it.
They will. So AMI is area median income. It is,
Median, but for the region.
yes, and it is done for the region. And when we talk about affordability levels, we measured in percentages, like 80% of the area median income. The area, it's hard to put a number on that because the area median income, it varies according to the number of people in the household. And so, you know, you have an area median income for a 1-person household, a 2-person household, 3-person household, and so forth. And
Fannie Mae has it listed as about 119,000 and some change.
right. And so the number of people in your household matters when you're applying to different programs. But yes, I mean, you can have an overall number that sounds about right. The one other thing I'm going to say about the optional R10 program, if I'll continue, is that it will remain optional as the universal affordability preferences appears to always be optional. Okay, another component of universal affordability preference is permitting supportive housing to use either use group 2 or 3 and to remove the special permit to use community facility FAR for supportive housing. This one is a little bit into the weeds, but generally speaking, it's very preferential for supportive housing. So currently the way it works, housing is use group 2 and most supportive housing is use group 3 or community facility, but very often it's community facility, but you still have to use the residential FAR, even though the community facility FAR is higher. Now, there is a special permit which allows supportive housing to get a special permit and use the community facility FAR. This housing opportunity will remove the special permit and replace it with a CPC authorization. That means it's no longer a ULURP action, but you will get the application and you will be asked for your comment from the community board, but that will, CPC authorizations mean no hearing at the CPC. They make the decision and city council is not involved. And this matters because in some districts, the difference between residential FAR and community facility FAR is substantial, especially the R7-2 and the R9 districts, a little less so in the R8 districts, but still there's a difference there. And so, this is like a little technical change, but it's actually going to make a difference as far as citing supportive housing and allowing it to use all of the community facility FAR for housing people. Okay, housing opportunity will make changes to permit buildings with all studio apartments. Okay, so now I'm going to move on from universal affordability preference to some of the other issues. Okay, so currently the way it works is that zoning prevents developers from developing apartment buildings with all small units. If you want to build a building with all studio apartments, you can't do it. It's against zoning. You have to use this thing called a dwelling unit factor, which is currently set at 680 square feet. And the way it works is that you essentially take all of your residential zoning floor area, divide it by 680, and if the number of units provided, you have to provide fewer units than what that number is. And the idea there is that they wanted to have units for some families. They didn't want all small units, and so they have this minimum size. And some of you may remember in the 2000s, the city issued called a mayoral zoning override in your community district. So one of these buildings with all small units could be built as a pilot. And in 2016, we lowered the dwelling unit factor to 680. It was variable according to the district. Some of them were up to 700, 750, 790. Now everything is a uniform 680. And housing opportunity will get rid of the dwelling unit factor in its entirety in your community district. It's still kept in some other places, but in most of Manhattan, it is gone entirely. This change is just a housing change. There's no requirement for any affordability. This is basically a supply side measure saying if we allow people to create more units in their building, they will, and that will create more housing for people. All right, number three. Number three is making infill on housing estates easier. This one is, I think, of special concern to your community district because you currently have a lot of these, what we call height factor zoning, height factor estates, and a lot of them are underbuilt. And this change will make putting new buildings on the open spaces easier. So this Kips Bay Tower, but Stuyvesant Town, Peter Cooper Village, East Midtown Plaza, and a bunch of others. You have a bunch of these types of housing in your community district. And, currently the way it works, Tower in the Park zoning encourages tower infill. And this is one that got a lot of press a while ago, 200 Amsterdam. This is not your community district. This is Lincoln Towers.
You had to chop the top off by court order.
Yeah, and then they ended up building it.
Yeah.
But essentially, this is what zoning, height factor zoning, Tower in the Park zoning, it requires you to build towers. And that's what they did here. This was an as of right building. It just was facilitated by a crazy, 37-sided zoning lot, but it was still as of right. And this is the same zoning district, R8, that is Kips Bay Towers. And so currently, if you want to do low-rise infill on existing housing, on an existing housing estate like this one is an R6 in the Bronx. If you wanted to put, low-rise infill like this, you just can't do it. But you could put an enormous tower right in the center, like 200 Amsterdam. And so City of Yes for Housing Opportunity is going to make major changes to how we consider infill development on these estates. So number one, it's going to permit quality housing infill so long as the overall FAR does not exceed the quality housing maximum FAR for the district. So I'm going to repeat this. This is a very big deal because this will allow for substantially more FAR in most Tower and the Park estates. So Stuyvesant Town. Stuyvesant Town is an R72 district, and it is essentially built out under residential regulations. If this passes, it would have an additional 1.5 million square feet of development rights for quality housing infill on the estate. That's simply because it's such an enormous lot, and essentially 0.6 FAR of an enormous lot will produce 1.5 million square feet of development rights. And it's not just floor area. To make sure the floor area can be used, Housing Opportunity would eliminate the open space ratio, which was this ratio. And they say it's complicated. People were confused by it. It's actually true. It is complicated. People were confused by it. But it ensured that these developments had and maintained ample residential open space for the residents to use. It wasn't public open space. It was private residential open space for the residents. And the idea there is you get rid of the open space ratio and you regulate open space with, yards and coverage requirements.
George, can I interrupt?
George?
Yeah. Yes.
Go on, Susan. First, go ahead, Susan.
George, I have to tell you, as president of the Stuyvesant Town Pete Cooper Village Tenants Association, I will fight this tooth and nail.
I hear you.
The last thing that we want to have is 1.5 million square feet of infill. Just so you know.
I mean, listen, Susan, when I was reading this, I actually thought of you, right? And I thought of it was, that's why I put Stuyvesant Town in here, because this is a big deal. This is a big deal in your entire community district, because you have so many of these places. And again, it's not just the FAR, it's also reducing the required distance between buildings from the 60 feet to match the minimum in the multiple dwelling law, which is 40 feet. So, right now you can put a big building, a big tower building in one of these estates, but it still has to be 60 feet away, usually, depending on how tall the building is, from other buildings. But this would allow it to be 40 feet away. It's a substantial, it's not only the FAR, they're doing the other things necessary to actually implement this. And the amazing thing to me, because we're talking about housing opportunity and affordability, this is all done without any affordability requirements. The 1.5 million square feet, or at least my reading of this, it seemed pretty clear in Stuyvesant Town would be all for market rate housing, according to this change. And
you may well smile, George, but
pardon me?
I am not smiling.
Oh, I'm sorry. I doesn't listen. I have no values, right? This is just what it does, right? And that's why I'm here.
Can I interrupt for just one more question? I think it's a clarification as well.
It's actually, it's an agreement with Susan. I didn't realize we were heading in the same direction. what gets lost in discussion is the quality of life for people, right? So I don't live in Stuytown, I live in the general area. The density now is so intense that I can't walk on, on Third Avenue or Lexington. There is so many people. And Stuytown greenery gives you a sense of life. With COVID, it was a saving sense of life. And it's as if that's going with the wind. So the notion of where's the quality of life for the people who live here, right, is not part of the discussion. It ruins it, right? And so I'm totally I take the same position Susan does, is that where's the consideration for an actual community and the life that we live there?
Yeah,
So you can use that as a question or a comment, either way.
yeah, I mean, I'll build on that. I mean, I think, since, golly, for 25 years, the city has been trying to make zoning changes to weaken or get rid of open space and essentially the tower in the park zoning, right? We now do contextual buildings for the most part instead of height factor buildings. We don't map new height factor districts. But I will say that, these existing estates that have, all this open space, right? This leafy green space. It's been designed that way. It's been designed to function that way. It's not like the open space is a development site, right? I mean, it doesn't say you can't put something there, but it really has to be designed. It has to be designed with the understanding of how the open space functions. And I think this kind of blanket large scale infill zoning isn't necessarily something that's going to be going to produce the results that people hope for. So I mean, there's a design element to this that zoning really can't deal with, and I'm not sure how to balance, environmental impacts design with these types of zoning proposals to create infill housing. And I'm going to add on to that and to say that infill, if the infill is affordable, it appears that the infill can be even bigger. And I say appears, because the scope of work is not entirely clear. So, but it is entirely clear that it will permit an increase in FAR and height for affordable infill buildings. So, in an R72 district, quality housing building is an 85-foot building with universal affordability preferences 115. But if it's an infill building, it'd be 115 feet tall, 155 feet tall, sorry, which is 70 feet, almost twice as tall as the basic quality housing building in an R72. And in an R9 district, it would be almost exactly twice as tall. It's a substantial increase, and I know why they're doing it. I know exactly why they're doing it. It's because this way it'll fit easier onto the sites that are available or the spaces that are available. But the proposal is absolutely unclear as how the maximum FAR of the zoning lot will be determined if there's a mix of affordable and non-affordable buildings. So, for instance, like on Stuyvesant Town, it's an enormous 2.6 million square foot lot, or it's actually not quite that big, but it's a very, very big lot, but it's assessed for zoning purposes as a single lot. So what happens if you put a building in that has affordable housing, and so you have a preferential FAR for that building, but the rest of it doesn't qualify for that preferential FAR? How do you calculate the maximum FAR of the lot? It's not clear. It's not clear at all. And so, I just saying, and I think everybody here gets it, is that the infill proposals impact your community district more than others. And I think it's going to deserve very special attention from this community board.
First, can I ask one clarifying question?
Yep, of course.
Maybe this is a dumb question, but can, let's say Stuytown, should this go through, take this additional FAR, turn around and sell their air rights to their neighbors, sell 1.5 million square feet?
So, no, not easily. essentially, zoning lot or floor area is transferred mostly through a zoning lot merger, except from landmarks, which are able to cross streets. And as far as I'm aware, I don't think Stuyvesant Town is a landmark. And so therefore its floor area is stuck on its zoning lot.
Got it. Okay. Sorry, we have a couple quick clarifications. Go ahead, Larry, then Jim.
Okay, this would be a good time to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, 680 square feet. Going away, that being a minimum size dwelling unit. So you could theoretically put everybody in a little cubicle or in a little cage with no minimum square feet, and it vastly increase the population as you're infilling the greenery of Stuyvesant Town. And imagine how many toilets there will be and what the impact will be environmentally on the sewage and the water and electrical requirements. I think we have to also touch upon the environmental assessment and how this is going to just blow everything that exists up.
Okay, I'll ask actually just for the sake of time, if there are questions, let's ask them now. If there are discussion points, let's pick them up at the end. Question? Go ahead.
A point of information. And this goes back probably 25 years. When the Trump World Tower, I think it's called, over on First Avenue near the UN, that was a transfer of air rights across the lines that you spoke about. Apparently, there's an old ruling from the 80s that was used for that transfer. So I wouldn't entirely rule out the possibility that the current owners of Stuyvesant Town could transfer those rights over across First Avenue to some of that older housing stock. It's an old ruling. That's what Trump's lawyers pulled out of the hat to get that building built.
I mean, I know if there's landmarks involved, you can do a lot of things. And we're going to actually talk a little bit about that because they're changing those rules as well. Okay. All right.
The council transfer too, or change that rule with respect to this upzoning of lot area so that they can, so that developers can benefit. I see a lot of money on the table for all of that.
Right. I mean, the way it was worded, though, I will say this, is that it said that if you put infill on a height factor estate, it's permitted as long as the estate does not increase the allowable FAR of the quality housing building. So it doesn't sound like it's being created. The floor area is being created. It's just that if you put the building there, it'll be permitted as long as it doesn't exceed that maximum. So it's maybe splitting hairs, but I think it doesn't sound like it's a right that's given, but it allows you to put a building there and allow it be permitted at that site.
Okay.
Okay. So, all right. So sliver law. So currently, the height of very narrow buildings, or really 45 feet is the limit, is limited to the height of narrow buildings are limited to the width of streets. So this is called the sliver rule, and it catches a lot of people, especially developers who aren't familiar with it and have a small site. And it prevents very tall, slender buildings. Unless they abut another tall, slender building or tall building. So if you're next to another tall building, you can go up to the height of that building. But if you're by yourself on the lot, you're very skinny, you're limited to your height is limited to the width of the street. So, and that creates crazy things happening, like this building over here, 181 East 28th Street. This portion of the lot that you see here with the red arrow, that was cut off of the developer's lot so that it did not front 3rd Avenue, because the portion that fronted 3rd Avenue is very narrow. And if it fronted Third Avenue, this building could only be 100 feet tall. And so they
Yeah.
cut off that piece of the lot, and so it no longer fronted First Avenue or Third Avenue, and so it was not subject to sliver. And
I've been looking at this building for 2 years, trying to figure out why they did that, and you just answered the question.
yes, yes, this is a thing. People do this. They're not the first ones to do this, and you know, for people like me, zoning people, I think everybody who does planning and zoning, we hate stuff like this. This is not the kind of thing that you want to see happen. You don't want to see little tiny pieces of land that have been cut off from lots to avoid rules, right? This is not a good use of urban land, and so you know there are certainly issues with the sliver rule, and this is you know the idea here is that if you have a quality housing building, the sliver rule goes away entirely. No more sliver rule as long as you have a quality housing building. And what I mean by quality housing is essentially the quality housing program, which is a height limited, high coverage building. And you know, quality housing buildings are already tuned to the context of the neighborhood. And you know, you very often see them in the mid-block R8B districts that have a 75-foot height limit, but you know, it's facing a 60-foot wide street. And so you're redeveloping a tenement, for instance, and you know, you're stuck at 60 feet instead of being able to go to 75 feet. But you know, it really matters in, you know, sometimes in the R10 districts where you have, you know, some small lots that, you know, are leftovers after some big development. This one is 1177 2nd Avenue right here. This building was limited to 100 feet because it is very narrow. And because it was limited to 100 feet, it could not use the optional 2 FAR inclusionary housing bonus. And so it didn't use it, didn't put any affordability, and got nothing. So in terms of affordability, and so City of Yes Housing Opportunity would get rid of sliver for buildings like this, so it could go taller up to 210 feet. But the affordability would still be optional.
So just to clarify, what that
Yeah.
means is that on a parcel that would otherwise be able to go up to 20 stories, like on a corner because of quality housing regulations, but would be capped because of the sliver rule, would no longer be capped, and it could go all the way up to the 20 stories.
Yes, that's exactly right. Said better and more succinctly.
All right.
All right, number 5, City of Yes for Housing Opportunity would increase the number of buildings that can be converted, the non-residential buildings that could be converted into residential use. So currently, non-residential buildings in Community District 6 can be converted.
Looks like you have this backwards.
Yeah, you're right. I did. Converted to residential uses, sorry, if they were built before 1961. And so what this does is it simply changes that 1961 to 1990. And so if you have an office building that was built in the 60s, 70s, 80s, you could convert it into housing. The housing can also be converted into rooming units, which means it doesn't have necessarily kitchens, or supportive housing. And those types of conversions to rooming units or supportive housing are currently not allowed. They're currently prohibited. And so if you had the right building, you could do supportive housing, you could do rooming units, or you could do a mixture of all dwelling units, rooming units, supportive housing in the right building. So this is not a major change. It's really just expanding the date in which most of these can be done and what kind of units would be permitted.
And it doesn't create a new category of rooming units. Rooming units already exist. It just means you.
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. Rooming units already exist.
George,
Excuse me. Rooming units are similar to the SROs.
Yes, they're hard to permit now, but yes, they are.
Okay, thank you.
George, are dorms included in that?
Yes, dorms are included in that, meaning like they are permitted as, like if you wanted to convert a non-residential building into a dormitory, you can.
Got it. Go ahead, Larry.
rooming units are potentially fire hazards, dangerous because of the lack of proper cooking facilities. People have toaster ovens and hot plates and other types of appliances that may cause fires.
It's true. And they've been discouraged for years. But they still exist in our zoning.
Okay,
All right, so housing opportunity will permit, this is one that surprised me, will permit floor area to float from landmarks and historic districts. So you all might be familiar with this, more familiar than most, because it's kind of East Midtown in a lot of ways. The idea is that if you have a historic district like this, you can take unused floor area from one or more of these lots and sell them to development sites anywhere in the block across the street or catty corner. So there's 8 blocks around this historic or on the block itself. So of the 9 blocks, this unused floor area can float and end up in any site on any of these blocks. So this is the Turtle Bay Gardens Historic District. And so anywhere from 50th Street and Lexington Avenue to First Avenue to 47th Street back to Lexington Avenue, this floor area can be transferred to. And so, currently landmarks can transfer across the street, essentially close transfers, and it requires a special permit. The idea with these types of transfers is that they would require an authorization or a certification depending on whether they needed bulk relief or not. And that's not a special permit, so that means no ULURP and no city council involvement. It's a fairly big change, because what this is going to do, it's going to really unleash or unlock an enormous amount of floor area, especially in Manhattan, because it's hard to do transfers from landmarks. There have only been 2 or 3 dozen done using the special permit since it was put into place years ago. And this will, it makes it administratively easier, and you can ship them much further. It's a very big deal, but it requires no affordability. This is something that's just a change in the rules.
So it's like transferring air rights or transferring floor rights.
Yes, right. Air rights is the common term, but it's you're transferring floor area or development rights.
So do you by any chance have a map of historic districts in Manhattan, just to understand how prevalent are these in our district? I did not know this.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I don't have it here right now. I could pop it up in a moment, or maybe afterwards when you are discussing this, I could bring up the historic district map in your area. But there's a lot of there aren't so many historic districts compared to 8 or 7, which are full of them, but you have a lot of landmarks, individual landmarks. And so, yeah, it's going to make a difference. It's absolutely going to make a difference in your area. And I'll pop it up after when we're in discussion.
Thank you.
Okay. Housing opportunity, this is the last specific one I'm going to talk about. We'll also make a major change to the tower on base regulations. So tower on base, what is that? So since 1993, most towers on the avenues follow this building form. It should be something that looks familiar to you, because we've been building towers like this for the last 30 years. Basically, you have to have a contextual street wall, setbacks over a minimum base height, and then 60% of the floor area has to be under 150 feet. And so what that means is that you pack the bulk in the bottom, and then you could stretch it out for the tower part, but the towers go 30, 31, 32 stories, and that's it. What's going to 350 feet, 400 feet maybe for the newer ones. And what they're going to do is they're going to remove the bulk packing where it says 60% of the floor area under 150 feet. What that will mean is that these towers will stretch, because what we found is that the floor-to-floor heights in buildings, 10 feet floor to floor, people, at least in luxury housing, don't do that anymore, right? You want to go 12, you want to go 14, you want to go 15. And when you allow for that, you get much taller buildings quickly. If you go from a 10-foot floor to floor building to a 15-foot floor to floor building, you've just increased the height by 50%. And this zoning change will allow for these towers to stretch and get a lot taller without using any floor area. And in fact, maybe they could use floor area if they buy it from floating landmarks. So it's a fairly significant change to how we do tower on base. All right, and then I want to finish this up with some thoughts and considerations and things that I was surprised at and things that I thought were missing. So I was a little surprised that housing opportunity is almost entirely carrot and no stick. There's a lot of incentives to do the right thing, but there are no mandatory requirements to produce any affordability. And it seems to be driven by supply side arguments. More housing is better. More housing will mean more affordability. And if you want to do affordable housing, the city will happily subsidize it with more floor area. This is 20%. But it's not going to require affordability unless you have mandatory inclusionary housing. But we only map mandatory inclusionary housing when there is a significant upzoning. And I was expecting to see something that would require some kind of significant affordability, but it's just not there. It also doesn't address some other concerns I was hoping to see. Like, for instance, it's this concept called bigfooting, which are these big buildings with very few units. This is 1165 Madison Avenue. It's in Community District 8. It is a brand new 10 FAR, 210-foot building with 11 units. It has a quadplex. Do you know what quadplex is? I had to look it up. It's a single unit that covers 4 stories of the building, like a duplex or a triplex. It averages 5,358 square feet per unit. And City of Yes for Housing Opportunity does not appear to do anything to require more units out of these types of buildings. And also, this is a very Manhattan-centric thing, but it's happening in a bunch of neighborhoods. We've been hemorrhaging units to conversions and combinations. So this is a sign near where I live. I took this picture. Small tenements being converted into single-family homes. These conversions, we used to see them, they're not new, right? We've been seeing them around Central Park and in Greenwich Village for a while now. But this sign, I took this picture in Yorkville, right? This is near First Avenue. And it's kind of crazy where you can have a tenement designed for 10 or 12 units 10 or 12 families being converted into single family homes. But we're also seeing the combinations in condos and co-ops where small units are being combined to create fewer but larger units. And City of Yes for Housing Opportunity doesn't do anything to address the housing unit loss in our existing buildings. And then finally, the next steps. So it's going to be referred out with zoning text in about a month. You're going to have at least 60 days for review. For City of Yes for Economic Opportunity, the chair permitted boards, community boards, to submit their comments 6 weeks after their due date, which effectively extended the review period, and a lot of boards use that time very effectively. In addition to the major zoning change, the application is also going to have a full EIS. So, you're going to have 1,000 pages of zoning text, and then you're going to have 1,000 pages of of environmental review, and you will need all the time you can get. And, finally, the city is encouraged comments at any time on any relevant topic. If you have strong opinions, and it sounds like you have on a few things, you might want to express your opinions now, even before referral in a kind of, direct or informal way to staff at DCP. And then, I think there are some special issues of concern. I mean, in big proposals like this, it's good to pick out things that are really important to your community district, like the infill proposal, and make that your issue and try to fight for whatever you think it should be. All right, so that's it. That's all I got.
Thank
I'm
you.
happy to take questions.
Okay, let's start with questions, then with comments. Question, go for it.
George, I have the impression from this, and I'm just going to ask you to what degree you agree with me, that this zoning proposal is a reflection of current trends in income inequality and doesn't reduce it, but in fact makes it easier to exacerbate that. From making the small units smaller to the large units bigger, without any restrictions or demands on building owners to improve the quality of life for the people who live there.
I think that's a very fair observation, and it's a big concern of mine. I work a lot with a lot of community boards, and, I do a lot of work in East Harlem and then on the Upper East Side, and it's amazing how different things are. So in East Harlem, in the new buildings, they're all bumping up against that 680 square foot limit, meaning they want to make smaller and smaller units. And if you go 10 blocks to the south on that Madison Avenue, like they're building, units with 5,000 square foot average. I mean, like it's so far away from the concept of tiny units. It's ridiculous. And they're like less than a mile away from each other. And, I would have loved to have seen a zoning proposal that addressed both of the issues, meaning, it's okay to have a building with a lot of studios if that's something that works, but you don't want all of your buildings to be only studios, right? And you also don't want all of your buildings to be, large lot subdivisions of the sky, right? You want housing for everyone. And that's not what I'm seeing here. So I think, part of that is driven by economic inequality, where, you have incredibly wealthy people who are now living and staying in Manhattan, and they demand, incredible luxury. And you know what? In our system, we give it to them.
All right, any other questions, thoughts? Go ahead, Aaron.
Just a little bit. Hey, George, I was just wondering if there's anything in the text amendments that talks to the idea of, I guess, occupancy of the different units. So I guess my thought is, how do you preserve some housing for families? And it seems like that's always really difficult to do. I don't know the way you design that, but is there anything with that objective in mind?
There is nothing. There is nothing with that objective in mind that I saw anyway. I mean, not in the scope of work. It's really disappointing. I mean, I will say one thing though. I mean, it can be argued that some of the combinations that we're seeing, especially in, some of the, 1970s era buildings that were built with a bunch of studios and 1-bedrooms, and now the combinations are coming along and making 2 and 3 and 4 bedrooms. So, some of that is family friendly, and some of it is happening because people are staying in the city and raising their family in the city. Whereas, in decades past, they would flee to the suburbs at some point. And so some of that can be expected. It's kind of a problem that you want to have. but, yeah, you know, I don't know that there's anything in here that suggests family-friendly units, not at all.
And just a quick follow-up to that, because I know it's hard to manage and maybe it's more also for rental buildings. It's that trade-off between a family of 4 being in a unit versus, you know, 4 20-somethings being in a unit. And what that does to pricing and things like that.
Right. I mean, these are good considerations. I mean, and it's going to impact stuff like that. So
Thank you.
I'm bringing up a map of the east side of your community district. These blue areas are historic districts. The green dots are individual landmarks. And so while you don't have as many as, you know, 5 has, you have enough to make a difference.
I'll just say real quick with regard to the combinations you were talking about, I live in a building where a lot of those have happened and are happening. And, you know, the problem is you have to be a multimillionaire to be able to engineer a unit combination like that. And it doesn't do that, response to the problem doesn't do anything for the overwhelming majority of families.
That's fair. I think that's an absolute fair observation.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I just don't think it solves the problem.
Right.
It helps keep the tax revenues in the city though.
Sure. Sure.
It does.
Go ahead, Victoria.
Oh, yeah, I just want, the notion of the AMI, you know, how that gets said, is that, and most of it I heard was maybe 80%, which doesn't really reflect a very large proportion of the population. So I'm wondering what's being considered, or is it being considered in any specific way? It seems so broad and general, the way, what I've been reading.
So what they have with this, that's a great point, and this is something that I think DCP is very sensitive to, and they've said that the average AMIs have not yet been determined for the universal affordability preference. They said that, you know, the 80% was what AIRS used, the Affordable Independent Residence for Seniors, and what they found is that it was too high. Because most seniors don't have an income of 80% of AMI, and so it was set too high. And so they have said that it will be less than 80%. They have said that it will be averaged, meaning that you could have lower balanced by higher, which gives you a range of folks that you could have occupying those units, just so that the average ends up being whatever the average is that they set. But I don't know what that number is going to be, but I think they're sensitive to it. You know, I will volunteer one other thing, which I should have put in here. It just came to me now, is that one thing that this doesn't do is the affordability program that most jurisdictions use is simply requiring affordable housing. So most jurisdictions, including I think all of them in Westchester County, require 10% affordable for if your project is over a minimum size like 5 or 10 units. You have to provide affordable housing, and that's something that the city of New York has stayed away from entirely, and this does nothing to change that.
Got it. Okay, Victoria, you had a question?
Yes. You mentioned something about the community facilities and supportive housing.
Yes.
Can you please explain it again? Because
Yeah, it's complicated. Okay, so supportive housing is usually considered a community facility, but it has to use the floor area ratio, the density of a resident. And so often that means that the advantageous or preferential community facility FAR isn't used for supportive housing. There is a special permit that allows for supportive housing to use the preferential community facility FAR. So they could actually build more supportive housing on the same site. And what this does is that removes the special permit and replaces it with an authorization. So that means it's easier to get. CPC authorizations, they don't require ULURP. You will be informed of them. You'll be given the application. They will ask you your opinion, but they won't ask city council. They will not hold a hearing. They will just go ahead and make a determination, meaning they being the city planning commission. So it'll be easier for supportive housing to use community facility floor area to develop larger buildings for more supportive housing.
I see. If there is a combination between community facility and supportive housing, is there any combination in the law that allows this to happen together, or this is?
Yes, yes. I mean, so community facility is a broad term that's used for many different types of uses, from churches to community centers to all sorts of things.
Daycare,
Schools, daycare, doctor's offices. And so yes, you can, you could have other types of community facility uses, or it could just be supportive housing, right?
Perfect.
It could be a mix of different types or just supportive housing.
Thank you, George.
Yeah.
Rich? Yep, go ahead. Oh, sorry.
Jim?
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, is there anything in the offing that will means testing for some of these affordable units? I'm talking in the instance of somebody who goes to work, say in government, low salary, and then 10 years later, he's a partner at a white shoe law firm. He's making $500,000 a year and what have you. And the second question is, are we doing anything with respect to landlords who are warehousing apartments and just not building them up because they're stuck in instances where they can't raise the rents, but the cost of doing repairs or renovations are so excessive they can't do anything to fix them? Is there anything like that with respect to the affordable housing?
Not in the zoning proposal. There may be other efforts, but this zoning proposal does nothing for either of those.
I know there are proposals at the state level regarding your second thing to ease up a bit on landlords who are in a situation where they can't afford to renovate the units. So, and we were going to talk about this at this meeting. We'll probably talk about it next month, but it is a thing.
Right. Any other questions or thoughts from the committee? All right, so George, I guess similar to previous zoning text amendments we looked at, we put our opinion in a resolution, pass it on to DCP, and then wait for a referral with a full text, with a full scope of work.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the process. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's you will be getting the referral probably in a month or so.
Got it. Okay, and we can take, there's one public question. Sharon, Brendan, can we take that question?
Sure. Sharon should be able to speak now.
Yes, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you so much, George, for that presentation. I'm just going to try to remember all of it. I have two questions. The first question is with respect to the open space ratio. You did not mention anything regarding NYCHA developments, and I was wondering if there's any impact there. Specifically, for example, the Wagner houses. Obviously not in this district, but so I was because the examples that you gave did not include NYCHA developments, and that's my first question.
Yeah, can I answer that one first? Because I think it's
Yes,
absolutely
yes.
worthwhile. So NYCHA developments, most of them anyway, are are Tower in the Park developments, just like the ones we talked about. And so everything that I've said here about, you know, the Tower in the Park developments in Community District 6 apply in NYCHA developments everywhere, right? The open space is seen as essentially a development site. And NYCHA has put out plans which have said that they want to figure out ways to develop their campuses more. And zoning has been a major impediment to that. And people have been talking about, you know, how to infill on NYCHA campuses since at least 1986.
Yes.
And this is the way to do it, right? This is being implemented, I think, largely to address the infill problem on NYCHA campuses. Because the way it works right now is that if you want to infill on a NYCHA campus, you got to put up a big honking tower. I mean, that's the way zoning wants you to do. And that's what a lot of the proposals that we've seen are. And this would allow for lower scale infill on the campuses, but it's will also allow for filling up most of the open space.
Thank you. And my second question is regarding the heirs. In the beginning of your presentation, George, you mentioned that the program overall was somewhat unpopular and that for a while it had not been implemented.
It
And
had been
I was
suspended, yes.
Suspended. Okay, gotcha. I was just wondering why.
So my understanding is, and I get this third hand, is my understanding is that they were, there was a threat of a lawsuit by, I think, the Fair Housing Justice Center, because it didn't apply evenly. It was essentially, it was discriminatory, and so I don't know. The solution clearly is to apply the bonus to all affordable housing, not just some affordable housing. And so I think part of the solution that they put forth solves that problem.
Thank you. Again, a wonderful, if I could get away with using that word, presentation, George. Really appreciate it, and thank Community Board 6.
Thank you. George, you'll be able to share your deck with us, right?
I will. I'm going to make a couple of fixes, but I will send it to you tomorrow.
Awesome. Much appreciated. Thank you so much, George.
Okay, very good. And let me know if there's anything else. Always feel free to reach out.
I'll ask one question, sorry, just before. You know, a resolution for us takes time to develop. Is there another way that we can have our opinions known prior to that you think is viable for a community board?
Well, okay, so if that's to me, I will say that the staff people at the Department of City Planning, they have said that they would like to hear from people earlier in the process. It helps them. They don't necessarily want a resolution. They just want to say, you know, hear from people to say that I think this is a problem because of X, Y, and Z reason, and so they can address it. So there is an informal way of doing that, and then there's the formal way of doing it, which would be a resolution that you formally adopt and send in. And ultimately, how you do it is, you know, that's entirely up to you.
Thank you.
So, Sandy, do you recommend that we do both of those things?
I highly recommend it because we don't have a lot of time.
Okay.
And it could be a matter of questions that we have for city planning, like why doesn't this address this? We'd like more information before we have our final resolution.
My understanding is that we can submit questions as a committee, but we can't actually submit an opinion as a committee.
Right.
Okay.
So if we can formulate those questions, I think that'd be very helpful.
Okay, so then can we get 2 volunteers, one from each committee, to help draft that together for next month? And if not, I'm happy to volunteer from our side.
I mean, you and I can do it.
All right, we got 2 volunteers. You're basically on both committees, so you're already fulfilling your quota. Okay, perfect, thank you. So
And I think
Rich and I will write it.
anybody who has a question, please submit them.
Share them with us.
Sorry.
Okay, perfect. So with that, moving on to our second agenda item. Missy, thank you so much for reading. Thank you, George. So we have a presentation from CB6 Planning Fellow Missy Quick on privately owned public spaces. All right, Missy, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Majed. Let me just get my screen up. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Wonderful. All right, thanks for making the time for me to present tonight, and thank you for the Housing and Homelessness Committee for being here and joining in on this too. So I will be talking about renovated privately owned public spaces in the district, which is a project that I presented just the scope for back in January. And so we'll be going through kind of some initial findings tonight for your input and feedback. And so this is just a picture of one of the case study sites before it was renovated, and then a picture of it after. And so that's coming later in the presentation as we get into case studies. But first, we're going to talk about, I'll give you a quick recap of the project. We'll talk about the POPS rules and regulations. POPS is the acronym for privately owned public spaces. And then get into the case studies, some initial takeaways, and talk about what's coming up next. And so throughout this, what I'm looking for you from you today is feedback really on if there's anything that doesn't make sense right now. Are there any takeaways that you have from the information that I'm presenting so far, and what further information would you need to work towards developing a recommendation on how to act on this information? And it's very much still in progress, so feedback is very welcome right now. So the project, what is the project? So I'm a community planning fellow working with the Fund for the City of New York that partners graduate students with community boards to help them on projects that are important, but they might not have the capacity to do themselves. And so that's what brought me here to working on privately owned public spaces for CB6. So the request or the idea here is that privately owned public spaces could be providing more value to the community than they are right now, particularly by renovating existing sites. And so what I'm doing is doing a case study on 2 sites in particular to understand the mechanisms and conditions that enabled those renovations to happen, and then assessing their benefits to the community so that the board can explore how to encourage other buildings to renovate their sites. So what I'll be talking about today is really the mechanisms and conditions part, all of the rules and regulations. And next month, hopefully getting more into the benefit to the community and a little bit more of these qualitative elements of these sites. So to gather all this information, just to quickly let you know my process, I did some data analysis of data from the Department of City Planning. I went over the regulations around these spaces. I did a literature review, which included 2 very important studies by William White and Gerald Caden. And then I was on site at these places doing observations, taking photos and making sketches. And I've been having lots and lots of conversations with people, with community board members and experts, the building management at each of these buildings, and then other community organizations. And so I just want to say I really appreciate all of the time people have given me and all their generosity in that throughout this process. And I'll point out here one of the most important data sources through this has been the privately owned public spaces data set from New York City Open Data, and that's maintained by the Department of City Planning. And so that kind of is the go-to place for all of the updated information and detail on each of these spaces. So getting into the rules and regulations. Something that I noticed through my conversations with community groups as well as community board members is that current information about POPs and how they're managed and where they are in the district is dispersed and not easy to find. So a lot of it exists out there, but it's just not in one accessible place. So I wanted to go over some of this to really set the stage for what renovations mean and how they happen. And just to revisit why this is important, it's because there's very little open space and green space in the district. There's only 3.3% of the space in the district is open space, and of that, only 2% of it is actually parks. And according to a study by New Yorkers for Parks, only 0.1 acres of there's only 0.1 acres of city parkland per 1,000 residents, which is the least amount of parkland per capita in Manhattan, and it's 57th out of 59 districts in the city. And so POPs are not included in that count, so they're a really important addition to open space in the district. And CD6 has 80 out of the 392 POPs in the city, which is the second most out of any district. And so these POPs, as a quick recap, they were started in 1961 as a zoning incentive. So kind of similar to some of the other incentives that we were just talking about in the last presentation. By building a public space as part of their lot, a developer could get extra FAR. And a lot of these are plazas. Some of them are arcades or covered spaces. Some of them are sidewalk widenings, and some of them are indoor covered pedestrian spaces. And what's important to know about the history of the program is that the regulations have changed a lot over time. And so in the beginning of the program, there were no amenities required. Then in the 70s, the program was revamped. And while there were more amenities required, it kind of lacked the specificity needed to ensure that it was implemented correctly. And so in 2007, the program was revamped again with even more detailed rules. But you see here that a lot of the spaces that are existing in the district right now, 77 out of the 80 were made before these rules in 2007. So we still have a lot of sites that were built when there were no amenities required. And that's why some of them are nice, but there are a lot of them that are maybe underutilized, don't have enough amenities in them to be good assets to the community. But what I found in kind of looking into these details that is promising for renovations is that in the 2007 rules, they adjusted the regulations so that any building that wants to update a part of their space that might affect the POPs. So like one of the case study sites, they wanted to update their lobby and their lower level floor. And so if they wanted to do those two things, they had to bring their POPs up to current standards because those renovations would affect the site. And so it's a way to kind of force them into bringing it up to closer current day standards. And so when talking about all of this, I wanted to go over the government agencies that approve these changes, oversee the program, and enforce these standards, because there's several at play here, and talk about who's responsible for maintaining these sites. So we have New York City Department of City Planning. They're the ones who run the program in terms of what the regulations and rules are, and they approve the designs for the sites. So whether it's design changes to an existing site or it's plans for a new site, DCP is in charge of approving that. And then after it kind of goes to being built, the Department of Buildings is actually the department that's in charge of checking violations and issuing any fines for any violations at the site. So that falls under DOB. And then there's several other different departments that do interact with these sites, like Department of Transportation or NYPD for when things are happening there, and NYPD might be called. And so that's just something to consider in how different agencies interact with these public spaces. And 311 is a really good resource where the community members can report violations that they see. And so those violations will then be given to the Department of Buildings, and then they'll come to the building to check that violation, issue the fine. And lastly, because the program has kind of been implemented in very different ways over the years, most of these POPs fall under Department of City Planning, but there's some of them that have gotten weird variances or approvals. And so they actually fall under Board of Standards and Appeals. And so one of the case study sites actually needed to get their design changes approved through the BSA instead of through the DCP. So it can be, that's all to say that this can kind of be a confusing process sometimes. And then when it comes to actual maintenance of the space, of course, there's building management, but I just wanted to bring us down to remembering that there's usually just the building staff that have to be out there each day, checking the space, kind of cleaning it up, dealing with any issues that might be out there, and that it comes down to really that person level of maintaining these spaces. But there's also the building management is really responsible for designating the resources and the money towards both putting the staff to managing spaces as well as keeping up all of the amenities that are there and making sure that they're clean and well maintained. And a gap that I saw in discussions with people is that because buildings can be sold and change management, sometimes it's sold and people don't really think about the POPs when they're buying it. A really big resource for information about this and how DCP communicates information and changes around POPs rules is land use lawyers. And so those lawyers are usually the point of contact for that information and kind of let building management know what the details are about these spaces. And lastly, just talking about regulations, currently, I just want to talk about what a successful POPs looks like. So according to the DCP's principles currently, the way that they think about these spaces and what an ideal space looks like is that it's open and inviting at the sidewalk, it's accessible, safe and secure, and it's comfortable and engaging. And that lines up pretty well with the conversations that I had with some community board members, talking about how we really want these spaces to be activated by a variety of uses throughout the day and be places that feel safe and welcoming to everyone. And so let's get into the case studies. So I looked at 2 sites in the district, and my selection criteria were first off through word of mouth identification of these sites, because the DCP data doesn't actually track renovations as one of the things that it looks at. Then I wanted to choose sites that had been renovated in the past 5 years to ensure that there were still people within management that could talk to the renovation process and really give us insight into what was happening there. And so I was able to confirm some of that using Google Street View to see when these places had changed. I focused on the northern half of the district because that's where the POPs are more concentrated. And I chose 1 commercial building and 1 residential building to get 2 different building types and kind of tenant experiences. And then one of these sites has been completed and one of them still in progress, so that we could get a look at what that process really looks like and what hurdles they're encountering as they are applying for the design changes. And so 783rd Avenue is our first site. And as I talk about these, trying to be mindful of time, today I'm just going to go over what the process was and give you a quick overview of these sites. There's a lot more observations that I've had about the way that people are using these sites and some things that are coming up that I think are interesting that I'm going to save for next month or the next time I'm able to come to one of the meetings so that we can use our time well. So 783rd Avenue was renovated. The renovations were completed in 2022. And as I mentioned earlier, it's this urban plaza here. And so that's located on 3rd Avenue between 48th Street and 49th Street. And this diagram shows that it spans that whole block. And the urban plaza is actually only the southern part of this block. And then the rest of it that goes around the block here, that is this dark gray bar, is called a sidewalk widening. And the reason that I call that out particularly is because this space around this building, the plaza actually extends all the way around the building. So all of that is open space and it's a nicely designed plaza, but only the southern part of it is what falls under the purview of Department of Buildings and DCP. And so at this site, here's just kind of some of the basic information that it was constructed in 1980s and then it was renovated just a few years ago. And this is some information which I can share after for you to look through in more detail about the bonus FAR that was allotted, which I know was a question from the community board about some of these spaces. And just looking a little bit more on what actually changed at these spaces. So at 780 Third Avenue before, it was all this brick and granite design. There was just this one long bench here. It had the brick flooring and street trees, but not a lot of other ways of activating it. And so through the renovation, they put in more lamp posts, additional trees and planting beds, concrete benches and flooring, and there's a lot more benches integrated throughout the space among the planting beds that you can't see all the details in here. And a lot of that is in compliance with the new regulations and kind of meets and exceeds the minimum standards for that. And so looking at the process to get from before to after, I talked with the building management, I was able to have a brief conversation with them, and the motivation, so why we wanted to look at what the motivation was, because it's unlikely that people are just going to be redoing their spaces just to redo the pops, because it's quite a large financial investment, and if they've had these spaces and they've been this way for years, why would they change them now? And so talking to management, they said kind of the motivation to start this process was that Nuveen Investments acquired the building, and they might be inaccurate in that timeline. I don't know when they acquired that building, but part of rebranding the building into what it's called now as the Gardens was renovating the first and bottom floor and updating the pops to create this continuous image and experience of the space. So bringing a lot of greenery into the lobby and then also bringing all that greenery out into the public space. And they're really focused on sustainability efforts and biophilic design. So that was a really big motivation for them to have this space reflect that image and to make it a better building for their tenants and have that kind of through and through of the experience of the building. In the application process, they mentioned that it took a really long time to do it. They had to go through a lot of different boards to get approvals, which I still need to follow up to ask kind of what boards that was and what that looked like for them. And I was able to get a copy of the zoning application for this design change. And while the zoning application it includes the design and it talks a lot about the land use in the surrounding area and kind of how the site was designed before and what their plans are and how that's going to be with all the regulations. Something that felt like a really big gap to me is that it didn't address the people in the area and how will people actually use this place, not just where are the benches, how many of them are there, but what do we want to see people doing and how do we want this to contribute to the area? I will say that I don't think this is a particular to 780 Third Avenue that they didn't do this. I think this is generally just the standard to look at the land use, but I wanted to bring that up as, since we're talking about making this a better addition to the community, that's something where there could be more focus of talking about, okay, who is using it and how are they using it?
Just see, in the interest of time, can we go through the second case study a little faster, knowing that folks will get this review after?
Yes, sure
Thank
thing. Yeah. So 285 Lexington Avenue, I'll just say that, so this is how the space currently looks. They're in the process of renovating. It was built in the 70s. And they went through, so it's a large arcade space that's been underactivated for a while. They came to the board last year, so you're probably familiar with this site, and their motivation is looking to get reduced hours because there's been a lot of increased use since the pandemic by homeless people in the area as like an encampment in the area, and they found that there's been issues with altercations and drug use at night and a lot more maintenance challenges, especially with having to clean up human waste or potentially drug needles at some times. And I'll call out here just that they came to the community board and they also have been working with St. Barton Park Conservancy to explore activations of this space. And I believe that they will have updates on how that process is going soon. So that's very exciting to hear. And so just last section here, the takeaways. One, and so I'll caveat this with, this is 2 case studies plus looking at some other sites and other research, but it's not a full survey of all places that have been renovated. So take some of these takeaways with a grain of salt. But as we suspected, the motivation for renovating, it's not primarily about the public space. While there is care about the public space, it's kind of other things that have motivated the renovation, like the rebranding or like maintenance issues and wanting reduced hours of access. When it comes to the renovation process, I think there's an opportunity to push for and talk more about who is using the space and how they're using it, not just how the space is designed. And looking at kind of the government side in the data, and what I heard in conversation is that DCP is also invested in getting buildings to update their sites. But seeing that there is a gap in kind of the information that they are making easily available right now about renovations it's not there. You have to do a little bit of digging to find it. And that there is this gap in communication as well between building owners and the DCP and kind of these rules and regulations about POPs. And so looking forward as thinking towards what recommendations might be in the future, I just want to call out some potential partners and leverage points. I'm going to have another conversation with the DCP's POPs team. The people at St. Martin Park Conservancy, Michael Ann Rowe and Kevin O'Keefe have been really enthusiastic and really helpful. So I'm continuing to talk with them about future plans. Carol and Norm at Murray Hill Neighborhood Association are also really interested in this work. And these are just early ideas, but knowing that land use lawyers are a really key piece of this communication, it might be another stakeholder to leverage, as well as the space architects, who are the people that do a lot of the work to examine the space and design it. And thinking about how they approach the work at these POPs. And so that brings me back to, I have a few more slides just about what's next, but this I'll pause here because this brings me back to the questions of looking for feedback from you all on this work. And so thank you for the time today. I know that it's late already. It's been a long night.
Thank you for the presentation. This is very helpful. Opening the floor to anybody with questions, thoughts. Go ahead.
So, Missy, thank you very much. This is actually very thorough. I think in the past, when we've had lawyers representing various clients that are coming to reactivate, redefine their POPs, the challenges have been that we have often been having a conversation about utilization, how they could be activated differently, how we could encourage public use different than some of the problems that they might be experiencing, but also open it up more so and make it less of a concrete, unpleasant, unwelcoming surface, kind of like what you showed in some of those pictures earlier. I think from a details perspective, the challenge is that the lawyers are often representing the very specific dimensions of a bench or quantity of a bench or gates, because that is what they feel they have to respond to in terms of drawings, providing architectural drawing to city planning or to DOB. I think it would be very encouraging if there was some humanization of these going forward, and if there was some better explanation of why there's so many benches and how they could be utilized. So it'd be interesting if we could think of ways to encourage that sort of thought into these plans going forward.
Correct. And related to that, you said that the regulations were revamped again recently. Do you think that the new regulations have resulted in better spaces based on the looking around that you've done?
I think that they have resulted in with all that detail in Better Spaces, I wouldn't say that they're perfect. I anecdotally I haven't been able, I talked with someone at the DCP, but not on the POPs team. I heard that they might be working on some like further changes and updates to it. So I'm hoping to get a little bit insight into what is happening there. Yes, so I think it has improved, but I think there's still area for improvement. I know one of the ones that has been built since 2007, I haven't been able to go yet myself in person, but is at I think it's called the Alexandria Center, one of the life sciences buildings. And that I'm trying to remember where this was, but I think I was reviewing my notes today and I saw something about kind of like issues with access at that site. So there still can be not, place can be not that welcoming even within the 2007 rules, which is, I think, part of what I want to figure out how to articulate coming back next month of some of these questions about like, okay, we're talking about privatized public space here. What does that mean about who feels welcome and allowed in these spaces?
Jim, then Kyle, then Larry.
If you go to the precinct meetings, some of the issues with the public spaces is that while public spaces are closed at a certain hour by the NYPD, the privately owned public spaces are not closed. So what happens is you get a migration of homeless coming from the public spaces to the private spaces. And as you discussed with the Lexington Avenue property that was in your presentation, that's where people have to deal with homelessness, defecation in plazas, or they're, in that case, I guess it's an arcade. But that's a situation that we get. So I think if we're looking at trying to improve public space or improve POPs, we need to limit the time that they're open to the public. Because otherwise, if you're already doing it for city parks, it makes sense then to do it for privately owned public space.
Yeah, hi Missy, great job again. One of the interesting data points actually from what you shared that would be interesting to see more of is this idea of access. I think one of my many personal issues with POPs is that I quite often think that developers use it as an amenity for their own buildings, own sort of clientele. I think one thing that would be interesting to see in this, since you are visiting this in person, is to see how many people who are utilizing the spaces are actually just regular community members or people who are from that actual building or site, or especially with like the Alexandria site, who's really, who's this really actually benefiting at the end of the day? Even though it's under the guise of, a public space.
Hi, Missy. This is wonderful. I'm looking forward to personally walking through the sites with you. And I'm thinking that where this might head and be of most use to this community board might be to help us to develop a framework or an outline or a template with regard to how we interact with the land use lawyers, asking the questions that you identified as not being from the statutes, what they need to answer, so that we can work on in the future developing our conversations with them so that they have an expectation of what we'll be asking best, so they can come and be prepared.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful to know that a framework would be a useful resource.
Great. All right. I think these are all the thoughts. I know there's more to come, but were there any other slides you want to click through?
Just to say what's next, depending on timing and scheduling, presenting at the next land use committee meeting. And what's up next for me is just ongoing conversations with some community board members. I I was looking at producing kind of like a booklet that could be a source after this. That's just like a POPS 101 for Community District 6. And then finishing out these case studies, developing recommendations, and discussing what's next in the next meeting. So that's it. So thank you, everybody, for making the time today and your recommendations and feedback.
Thank you.
Great, much appreciated. All right, with that, moving to our third and final agenda item, which we'll keep brief. It's just a follow-up discussion on the FDR Reimagined report. So this was presented in full board, and we said if there are any follow-up thoughts or questions, this would be the space to ask. So just opening the floor to anybody with thoughts on this. Gabe,
Two quick thoughts. One, public transit, are we in a position yet to sort of make an ask for the MTA to make this in a busway of some sort? Is this the design, the phase of the design where we would begin those discussions? And two, I'm wondering about the cost mitigation, particularly like, are we looking at design build or something like that to keep this from turning into a multi-decade, multi-billion-dollar project when perhaps it need not be?
Yeah, good question. Actually, a week before we presented, CB3 came out with their own study for the future of FDR in their part of the district, but it was less, how do I say this very, very diplomatically and nicely? It was more pragmatic than ambitious. It just, from the get-go, outlined that if there's an option to cap, there's an option to turn into a boulevard, but both of those require a further analysis, which DOT was not interested of as part of that project. So they eliminated those and moved on to, overpasses and improvements to road safety, which are all very valuable. But it was not necessarily a vision, it was more of an extension of ESCR. So outreach to agencies, I think like MTA or others, is I think 2 steps ahead of us. Like the next step is just take it to like the officials, showcase it, see who has alignment, who even is curious about this vision. I think we'll find a lot of folks who are interested, but agencies would be one step beyond, because we need to do a proper analysis, transit analysis. I don't know, Sandy, if you have anything else to add to that.
No, I mean, it really, the CB3 it was promised them as part of the ESCR project. So that's why we did it, and it does not seem that. I mean, CB3 feels it's not funded, so it's not gonna go anywhere. That was their response when I questioned.
Got it.
So, but no, I really think we should, if we can, show this to as many people as possible and try and move it forward. And I think that's one of the reasons why we were hoping to get a resolution so that we could move forward with it as something that the board wants to proceed with.
Yeah.
That's potentially the goal this evening.
Okay, Larry and Kai.
Yeah, Majed, could you clarify for me, engineering of the viaducts, what you're anticipating? Because I'm reading or maybe I'm interpreting it my own blinders on. Are you talking about removing the interchanges?
You mean on and off ramps?
Well, the road was originally a boulevard, and in the 50s, there was a cutting off of the traffic's ability to get on and off that boulevard, in particular, at the creation of a few interchanges, 23rd, 15th Street on the southbound direction, and then 34th and 42nd Street.
Right.
And the area around Stuyvesant Peter Cooper Village was substantially rebuilt, so it wouldn't fall down. Then we had ESCR, and it's hard for me to conceive of other than activating the area under the FDR Drive, possibly taking that roadway down in that area, because it seems to function, and people have access to the water in that area because of the elevated highway. In the area of Waterside Plaza, there was a bridge that wasn't built across. And maybe that could be a specific recommendation. And then I'm a little confused by the area around 34th Street and what seems to be envisioned as basically being an area of greenway. Not quite sure where the traffic will pass through. So those are my observations. Do you have any clarification that you can provide?
Yeah, I'll say very briefly, and just as a note, the report is now shared. It was delayed. I take some of the blame in the delay in getting this all to you. So obviously we can discuss more once you've taken a chance to look more closely. The point of removing viaducts is breaking up the limited access parkway. Limited access parkway meaning a car gets on the FDR, does not stop until it's off. Hypothetically, they have that option. That means if you need to get in the city, you either have to get under it or over it. That means this is where you get into the dips and the viaducts. Removing those institutes that you do crossings, you just restitch that road to the rest of the city. It becomes part of the grid. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to slow down. You're going to stop at every intersection like you would on First Avenue. You would institute basically green waves and busway. You add a busway and you say, all right, if you go a certain speed, you can go FDR from beginning to end nonstop. But if you go over or under, or if you catch traffic, you stop at a traffic light. That's where folks cross. So part of that is, part of that argument is not just improving accessibility to the waterfront, but acknowledging that these viaducts are really old. They require a lot. They are very costly to maintain. They're just obviously at the waterfront, so they are.
Okay, I was just bringing to your attention that the viaduct in the Stuyvesant Peter Cooper Village area was recently rebuilt.
Right.
The area around 34th Street may be an opportunity that represents an old structure that hasn't yet had the rehabilitation. Maybe the focus should be there.
Right, yeah, that makes sense. It's as part of the report highlighting that different areas will require very different treatment, have different priorities. Some have received some funding and maintenance, and some haven't, like 37th Street, which.
All I'm saying is that there's a given pot of money that maybe should be concentrated where it'll do the most good.
Makes sense.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna stress again and again, kudos to the WXY team, and I think to us as a board as well for producing something such high quality for a vision, which is not what you usually get from a community board. But I think a lot of these questions are sort of like jumping the gun a little bit as well, because the idea behind this report was to be that first step in getting this vision out into the public, that we could even conceive of something like this. Because I think for a lot of people, they automatically have to say, how could you ever do anything to change that? And WXY produced 3 different types of ways that we could do this, right? And so, as Sandy said, our team now has to be strategic in the outreach, and obviously at Borough Board as well, connecting with those other community boards that are along that same corridor of the FDR, but figuring out where, the borough president is already supportive of this idea of re-envisioning the FDR. How do we get all the other sort of political powers and B to further this conversation where we can actually do more specific studies on each specific, intersection, each specific row of the viaducts, et cetera, so on and so forth, in a more sort of specific budgetary way, grid way. There's some things that we don't have access to, obviously, as non-city employees, that will come into the fray as well. But this is just meant to be a first step, and the endorsement of our board to be like, we would like to re-envision that into something more publicly accessible.
And, sorry, I know there are other people who have their hands up, but just to let you know that CB3 and CBA were very interested in starting a task force to look at this. So partly, I think we want to have, we want to decide if this is something we want to investigate and move forward. But sorry, other.
All right, I'm just gonna go in order. Letty, Susan, then Jen. Go ahead, Letty. You're on mute if you're speaking. Okay, Susan, do you want to go? What? Oh, no,
Yeah,
there you go.
It's just going to be very brief. First, I want to say kudos to the people involved in the report. I thought it was really very impressive and just a wonderful effort. And I think, Larry, you said something about the bridge to Waterside, that is going to be substantially rebuilt as part of the Science Park and Research Center. They're going to make it handicapped, accessible, and it's really going to be fleshed out.
Susan, I'm assuming that's going to be built. I'm speaking about a few blocks north, closer to Alexandria, another bridge.
Oh, okay, fine, I'm with you.
That was the original plan at some point.
Yes, that's why I'm saying we should implement it.
All right, go ahead, Letty.
No.
Oops, sorry, went on mute. I just heard no. Jim, do you want to go meanwhile?
No, I'm just wondering, I only had a chance to skim this report this afternoon when I got it. But, I'm just wondering what the ultimate objective is. Are we looking at a 197A plan perhaps for this? Or, what ultimately do we plan to do with it? Other than make a generalized proposal?
I'll defer to.
I think it would be a 197A.
No, it doesn't seem like.
It's not that type of, it doesn't involve zoning necessarily, so more it's to advocate for all our city agencies to take a look at this, that we're very serious about how to change it. And because there's so many different agencies involved, I think we're gonna have to, work through how this could possibly happen. But right now it's advocacy.
And I think especially like doing it in concert with all of the ESCR stuff in the Midtown, bids, all the acronyms, the Greenway coming down as well, that this is like opportune time to take a look at it, advocate for it, and then also push for something.
Okay, Letty, any thoughts from you?
No.
All right, thank you. All right, if so, is there a motion to put our thoughts in a resolution on this issue?
Yeah.
All
right,
perfect.
Now, one question, is this just gonna be voted on by land use or land use and housing?
I think
It seems
just
mostly
land
like
use.
the Land use.
Yes. Yeah, land use.
Yeah, that.
Land use
that's
and
what I
water.
guess,
Well,
but
Najat, confirm, like, you want to vote on supporting it right now, or do you want to vote on us to put out a resolution on it?
Resolution for folks to vote on next month? Or, because is this holding us back? Are we in a time crunch to get this?
Well, it's in the public now because we're gonna put it on our website, so, I'm not.
I just don't see any specificity. I saw a number of alternatives. And
Right,
what I
there's nothing
see,
specific.
yeah, exactly, and
It's-
how do we
That's,
write a
that's,
resolution?
well, that's my question,
Yeah.
is the motion to support this project going forward, like,
The general
endorsing this
concept.
project?
Yeah.
Or are we voting on, we should vote on this, because then we don't need to do that, we could just vote on it when we're comfortable with it.
In other words, are you saying that, we don't have to have a vote today if, some sort of a draft resolution has been prepared in the month to come to respond to, and then have a discussion about, because right now it's an amorphous idea.
Well, we're voting to have a resolution that says that, we're voting to say that somebody should do a resolution of support of the whole general idea.
And reflecting thoughts by the committee that are outlined? Go ahead, Kip.
Oh, I mean, I'm just wondering what the value add is in waiting a month if it is so lacking in specificity, and we are just asking agencies to look at the body of work, the work that you produced. I don't see any value in waiting a month. We should be.
Oh, okay, but that's a different way of conceptualizing it than I had, when, it was first mentioned that perhaps we could have a resolution. I'd be willing to support what you're saying, Gabe, because that's directed, it calls for action.
Just puts the report out there in front of city agencies that this is something that. the
We're
board has
asking
done.
the city agencies to look at this and to respond to it.
Got it. In which case, this is a vote on supporting this report. And then the full board would vote on it next month. Am I phrasing it correctly?
That would be, the correct summary of what I said.
Okay, all right, is there a second on that?
Second.
All right, Brandon, you have clarification?
Just one question. Is this something that is time sensitive? Because technically for the bylaws, unless it's time sensitive.
No, this is what we're trying to get a full resolution, written for next month to vote on. Is that essentially what we're doing?
Yes.
Okay, so if
It's kinda like a
if
straw
we're
poll.
voting on the resolution for next one, we don't need to take a vote now.
Oh, no, sorry, to clarify, we are
Yeah.
voting on writing a resolution that the full board votes on. So we can take
Oh,
it to
we're
the city
talking-
agencies, that's the urgency.
Okay, what's the meeting timing? 'Cause
Well, Larry,
everything's messed
so
up.
what we're voting on right now is to endorse the plan right now.
So,
So that the full board can vote on it at our next full board meeting.
because
That's
it
what
is time sensitive.
And then
Brendan
when
just
somebody
brought up
writes a
that
resolution.
How is it time sensitive?
Because we need to, one, get working with our other, community
But for
boards,
summer.
north and south of us, and yes, the summer is coming.
The other issue I have is, where do we put this with respect to the budget priorities? I mean, if it's going to be any kind of, is there any kind of budget
Really too low.
implication to it?
Not yet.
Cost to them doing?
Not yet, next year.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Okay, so
Are we,
okay, so I've seconded it and
Okay, so we're doing roll call on this?
Yes.
Thank you.
So when I call your name, please say whether you're in favor, oppose, abstain, or abstain for cause. Majed Abdul Samad.
I should abstain for the cause that I'm involved in the drafting of this in both capacities.
Yeah. Victoria Benatar,
In favor.
Jim Collins,
Aye.
Rich Mintz,
In favor.
Larry Shire,
in favor.
Sandro Sharad,
In favor.
Lenny Simon,
In favor,
Susan Steinberg,
In favor,
Mark Thompson,
In favor.
and Gabe Terzo.
In favor.
Okay, with 9 in favor, nobody opposed or abstaining, and 1 abstention for cause, this passes.
Great, thank you very much. All right,
Who's
so
drafting?
who is drafting? Good.
I can work with you.
Thank you so much.
I'm on that task force.
He's on the task force, that's true, our working group. Okay, before we wrap, just chair's report. Our next 2 meetings need to be rescheduled. The first falls on holiday, the second falls on Memorial Day. So first, let's talk April. Brendan sent out a request for April 16th. Please, if you haven't responded yet, just confirm so we know if we have quorum on that. For the May, which needs to be rescheduled because it's on Memorial Day, we will follow up with a date once that's identified. And that is the only chair report I have. So any old or new business from either committees?
I'm gonna defer all of that till next time. Yeah, nothing.
All right,
Motion adjourned.
no objections, meetings adjourned. Thank you, everybody online. Thank you here.
Oh my God.
So the marathon of a meeting.
We did it. I was a little too far in the weeds.
Next.